Teren did not leave the archive chamber when the shift bell marked artificial midnight. He stayed seated in the dim blue wash of the terminal while the sanctuary's light cycle sank into its curated darkness, staring at the same cluster of anomalies as if patience alone might force them into a safer pattern. It did not. The timing remained too precise. The brief fluctuation during the ceremony. Ambassador Ilara Thorne's small two-finger gesture. The deep field mass echo buried in a maintenance queue scheduled for deletion by morning. Taken separately, each could be dismissed. Together, they aligned too cleanly to ignore. That was the problem with the first real clue in any crisis. It never arrived as certainty. It arrived as a pattern that made too much sense too quickly. He reopened summit surveillance and pulled the main dome feed from 3 different angles. The human delegation had concealed their reaction well. No one had reached for a device. No one had spoken out of turn. No posture had shifted enough to trigger formal threat markers. Yet now that he knew when to look, he could see it. A tiny alignment of attention. Not panic. Not surprise. Recognition. Ilara Thorne's gesture had not been nervous movement or idle etiquette. It had been a signal precise enough to pass unnoticed in public and meaningful enough that her people answered it without looking at one another. That changed the question. The issue was no longer whether the humans were hiding something. Every delegation hid something. The issue was what kind of thing could approach a coalition sanctuary without appearing on formal security screens, and why the newest species in the room seemed more prepared for it than the civilization hosting the summit. By first watch, Teren had crossed the line from concern into private inquiry. He filed no formal notice. Sent no early suspicion marker. Shared nothing with his section lead. He told himself that was prudence. A false accusation during accession review could poison 3 sectors and shatter humanity's entry into the coalition before he even understood what he had found. That was the professional explanation. The private one was less flattering. He needed one more piece before he risked being wrong in public. Analysts called that discipline. Later, he would call it the last quiet decision he ever made that night. By sanctuary morning, Orith Prime woke in layers. Light returned to the upper galleries first, then the transit corridors, then the dining spines where delegates emerged in carefully managed states of restfulness. Teren moved through them with the ordinary invisibility of rank and function, collecting fragments of conversation while appearing not to listen. Humanity was the subject everywhere. Their composure. Their restraint. Their willingness to accept inspection measures. Their peculiar ability to make older powers feel gently old-fashioned. Several delegates praised Thorne's speech. 2 speculated Earth had deliberately understated its industrial strength to avoid provoking defensive blocks. 1 joked that the humans seemed suspiciously reasonable. That line stayed with Teren longer than it should have. He skipped the mid-cycle policy session and diverted instead to the lower service ring, where diplomacy gave way to machinery. The maintenance spine was one of the sanctuary's least ceremonial spaces: resin floors, exposed conduits, freight rails, humming panels, technicians who cared more about calibration drift than political meaning. He found the operator who had filed the mass echo anomaly. Neril was a narrow-faced Vesh technician who looked nervous simply being addressed by someone wearing summit credentials. Teren kept his voice mild. "Your anomaly report from Second Watch. I want clarification before I close it." Neril frowned in immediate embarrassment. It should not have gone upward. The field was dirty. The eastern shield flare caused half the spine to spit phantom reflections. Phantom reflections don't usually carry a mass profile. The technician hesitated. That hesitation told Teren more than the answer. It did not carry a stable one, Neril said carefully. But it carried one. For less than 4 seconds. Then it was gone. He lowered his voice. "I marked it as lensing interference because the alternative made no sense." "What alternative?" Neril glanced toward the panel wall as if worried the machinery itself might overhear. "Something large. Motionless relative to the sanctuary. Outside declared approach lanes. Far enough out that the reading should have been impossible at that resolution." "Large how?" "Larger than a diplomatic carrier. Smaller than a siege moon." Teren felt his pulse settle into something cold and exact. "Why bury it?" Neril gave a humorless breath. Because anything in that range not on the manifest becomes someone else's problem. I prefer my problem solvable. Motionless relative to the sanctuary. Not passing through. Waiting. The next piece came from a source Teren trusted even less than faulty sensors. Human openness. Jonah Mercer was exactly where the public slate suggested he would be, in the cultural annex, standing beside a wall of pre-digital Earth artifacts, explaining mechanical watches to a cluster of fascinated junior delegates. He spoke with the same easy patience he had shown the previous night. Humans, Mercer was saying, spent centuries inventing more precise ways to measure time while remaining emotionally terrible at using it wisely. The group laughed. Mercer smiled with them. Then he looked up and saw Teren standing in the doorway. He excused himself without hurry. You look worse rested, Mercer said as he approached. That usually means guilt or discovery. I need a private conversation. Mercer studied him for half a beat, then nodded toward a side gallery lined with observation glass and sculpture alcoves. That phrasing rarely improves anyone's day. Once the doors sealed behind them, Teren stopped being polite. There was an object outside sanctuary perimeter during the ceremony, he said. Large enough to disturb deep field mass readings. Your ambassador signaled at the exact moment it registered. I want to know whether your delegation knew it was there. Mercer did not answer immediately. The easy warmth remained on his face, but it changed texture. The charming cultural liaison did not disappear. Something colder simply stepped closer behind him. That, Mercer said at last, depends what you mean by new. It means anticipated, detected, or arranged. A dangerous range. Choose one. Mercer turned toward the glass, toward the dead world below with its silver storm veins and ceremonial silence. Analyst Vale, he said, have you ever noticed institutions only call something impossible when they mean unbudgeted? That is not an answer. It is the beginning of one. He folded his hands behind his back. The coalition believes first contact arrives through recognizable steps. Signal. Distance. Review. Invitation. Negotiation. It assumes history comes by staircase. Humans do not always share that assumption. Teren's gaze hardened. Still not an answer. Mercer nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the fairness of the complaint. We came here in good faith, he said. We came to join. But we also came aware that our arrival had interested parties beyond the council chamber. Who? Unknown. Expected by whom? A short pause. By people on Earth who do not get paid to be surprised. That landed harder than Teren expected. This was not merely caution. It was infrastructure. Hidden systems beneath the bright face of diplomacy. Humanity had not sent only idealists and diplomats. They had come with contingency already alive. Why say none of this publicly? Teren asked. Because public alarm rewards whoever is testing the room, Mercer said. And because until last night we did not know whether the Watchers were observing us, your hosts, or the simple fact that a new alliance might shift a region grown too comfortable. The word Watchers stayed between them. Teren stepped closer. What are you not telling me? Mercer's expression softened almost regretfully. Enough to keep you offended, he said. Not enough to keep you safe. That should have sent Teren straight into the security channel. Instead the station darkened. Not fully. Not as a power failure. The observation glass simply lost its light for 3 silent heartbeats as something passed between the sanctuary and its nearest star. An eclipse. Unscheduled. Impossible. Clean. Then the light returned all at once. Mercer did not look surprised this time. He looked like a man whose waiting period had just ended. Now, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the glass, they know we noticed them back. What followed was not panic. That was the first sign of how dangerous the moment truly was. Panic was visible. Panic could be contained. What spread through Orith Prime instead was disciplined confusion. Corridor traffic slowed. Security teams moved without sirens. Public terminals refreshed and refreshed again. Delegates kept speaking in measured tones while every private channel in the station began to burn. Teren watched the first stage of institutional denial unfold almost beautifully. The eclipse became a transient alignment fault. The blackout became a sensor flare. Exterior maintenance crews were quietly recalled. 3 decks were sealed under harmless diagnostic language. No one wanted to be the first official voice to admit that something large enough to cast a shadow across a coalition sanctuary had crossed detection limits without permission. Because admission meant vulnerability. And vulnerability at a summit meant leverage. Mercer saw the same thing. "Your hosts are about to lose an hour to procedure," he said. "Whoever is out there knows that. We do not have an hour." "We don't have trust either," Teren said. "Not enough for me to treat vague human warnings as operational fact." Mercer gave him a sharp, humorless look. "Good. Blind trust would make you useless. But if you wait until every committee agrees a knife is a knife, you're going to spend the rest of your life explaining why your station was still studying the blade while it was already in the room." That line hit exactly where it was meant to. Teren sent the alert. Not through the main summit channel. Through a direct route to Security Minister Serat, whose distrust of emerging species was matched only by her hatred of incompetence. He did not accuse humanity. He did not name Mercer. He sent timestamps, the maintenance reading, the eclipse event, and one line of recommendation. External sensor isolation now. Accession protocols suspended quietly. Human delegation contained but not challenged until intent is established. Serat's reply came 12 seconds later. Acknowledged. Report in person. Bring everything. He almost went. Then the first real breach happened. It began in the sanctuary's memory spine. Not weapons. Not shields. Records. 3 public historical archives glitched at once. A treaty sequence lost a signatory species for less than a second. A border conflict summary blanked its casualty totals. A Foundation charter loaded without its original date, then corrected itself before most readers could register the error. Any single fault would have been routine. Taken together, they formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Something was not attacking Orith Prime's armor. It was probing its trust. Mercer had seen the pattern before. Teren knew it from the way his face changed. "What is that?" Teren demanded. "Testing," Mercer said. "For what?" "For whether your people understand what they depend on." Then the next wave hit. Private comms began to desynchronize. Not drop. Desynchronize. Messages arrived out of order. Audio attached to the wrong sender. Clearance tokens lagged by fractions of seconds, enough to make mid-level authorizations fail across logistics, sensor review, and internal movement control. It was not a sabotage pattern meant to disable a fortress quickly. It was worse. It turned confidence into uncertainty one system at a time. That was when Serat arrived in person with 6 guards and no patience left for ceremony. She entered at combat pace, command mantle half-fastened, predatory eyes moving from Teren to Mercer to the dark beyond the glass. "Explain why my sanctuary is forgetting how sequence works," she said. Teren gave her the mass echo, the ceremony timestamp, the eclipse. Mercer corrected him once. Serat looked at him the way apex predators looked at sudden motion. "You anticipated interest beyond this station," she said. "That is close enough to prior knowledge that I may choose to. It deception." Mercer did not flinch. "We anticipated observation," he said. "Not penetration. That distinction comforts me less than you think." "It should." He stepped toward the glass. "Minister, someone outside this station is using presence as leverage and uncertainty as entry. They do not want your shields first. They want your judgment." Serat's face did not move, but Teren knew her well enough to see calculation sharpening behind the stillness. "And why," she asked, "would humanity recognize that pattern so quickly?" Mercer was silent for a moment. When he answered, all performance was gone. "Because it happened to us first." The room changed. "Not an invasion," Mercer explained. "Not openly. Long before Earth reached coalition space, human deep observation networks had begun detecting impossible distortions at the edges of mapped transit behavior. Shipping delays without cause. Colony relays that repeated official notices perfectly while carrying altered metadata. Diplomatic crises resolving before their triggers could have propagated. History without the texture of causality. At first the anomalies looked bureaucratic. Then statistical. Then absurd. Eventually a small section of Earth's analysis community reached a conclusion Teren was now approaching from the other side. Someone in the wider galactic order had learned to shape reality by controlling administrative sequence before force was ever required. Not conquest by battle, Mercer said. Conquest by chronology. Change the order in which populations encounter truth, fear, law, and memory, and most of them will police themselves before a fleet ever moves. The archive glitches. The desynchronized comms. The eclipse. The false calm. None of it was random. It was doctrine. Why target Orith Prime now? Teren asked. Mercer looked directly at him. Because accession moments are thresholds. New species force institutions to redefine themselves. Thresholds are unstable. If you can distort sequence at the exact moment a system decides what to include, you can shape what it believes it chose. That should have unified the room. Instead it split it faster. Serat ordered the human delegation restricted to its assigned wing pending inquiry. Mercer refused the escort before the guards even moved. If you isolate us now, he said, whoever is outside will know the sanctuary has turned inward. That triggers the next stage. Serat's eyes narrowed. And what, exactly, is the next stage? Mercer answered in 4 words. Localized trust collapse cascade. The station lurched. Not gravity. Not impact. Something subtler and more precise. Every wall display in the gallery, every slate in the guard's hands, every suspended information ribbon across the sanctuary bloomed at once with a message no official system acknowledged sending. Coalition notice, human accession review revoked. Biocognitive contamination risk confirmed. Internal security purge authorized. The message vanished after 2 seconds. 2 was enough. A guard turned instinctively toward Mercer. Another toward Teren. Somewhere deeper in the station alarms began, stopped, then resumed on the wrong interval. Doors sealed in one corridor and opened in another. Across summit decks, delegates who had trusted the process 1 moment earlier now had proof, or what looked like proof, that the process itself had condemned the newest species in the room. Mercer moved first. Not toward escape. He snatched the nearest guard slate, overrode the local display band, and threw transmission metadata into the air. It did not originate from Sanctuary Command, he snapped. Look at the delay fault. It was inserted between authentication layers. Serat read the data and understood immediately. Someone wants us to believe we already chose violence. Yes, Mercer said. Because once you act on a forged sequence, the forgery becomes history. That line hit Teren harder than anything else that night. This enemy did not merely lie. It manufactured irreversible context. If institutions reacted before verifying, they became the instrument of their own corruption. The next revelation came from an unexpected source. One of Serat's junior guards stepped forward pale-faced, holding a private comm slab with both hands. Minister, he said, the Deep Vault just opened a restricted ancestry layer in response to the false purge order. It only unlocks during continuity attacks. Serat went still. Why was that protocol not in my briefing? Because it was sealed before your tenure. Founding era contingency. She took the slab, scanned it, and for the first time looked genuinely blindsided. What is it? Teren asked. Serat looked from him to Mercer to the dark beyond the glass. Orith Prime, she said slowly, was not built only as a sanctuary. It was built as a witness site. The room went silent. The founders anticipated an external power capable of tampering with sequence, records, and interpolity trust. This station was placed here because the dead world below contains physical archives too primitive to rewrite remotely and too redundant to erase cleanly. If continuity was ever attacked, the sanctuary was meant to verify truth against buried original history. Teren stared at her. You're saying the coalition knew this was possible? Serat's jaw tightened. I am saying someone at the coalition's beginning feared it enough to build against it, then buried the knowledge. Mercer's expression became very still. Then this is larger than accession interference, he said. They didn't come because humanity arrived. The implications slammed into place. Humanity was not the cause. Humanity was the trigger. Earth's arrival had forced something buried at the coalition's origin to stir, and something outside, something old enough to recognize that awakening, had moved at once to smother it. Then the dead world below answered. The silver storm veins brightened across its dark hemisphere, converging into geometric lines no natural weather system could produce. Ancient patterns awakened beneath the cloud layer like circuitry under skin. The observatory glass filled with reflected light from something buried and immense turning on beneath the planet's crust. And in that reflected glow, Teren saw Jonah Mercer stop looking like a diplomat entirely. He looked like a man who had just recognized an old enemy. For one suspended second, no one moved. Then Orith Prime began to come apart in earnest. Not physically. Procedurally. Security teams received conflicting corridor directives within the same 5-second window. Docking clamps cycled without authorization. Delegation wings sealed, reopened, and sealed again under contradictory threat labels. Half the emergency panels displayed evacuation routes. The other half marked those same routes as compromised. Somewhere on the upper diplomatic ring, an armed response team detained the wrong aides because a forged priority order reached them seconds before Serat's real one. That was the final shape of the attack. Not destruction first. Misalignment first. Force would come after judgment had already been turned against itself. Minister, Mercer said, if you try to restore order only from inside the sanctuary, you lose. They're inside your sequence architecture. You need external ground truth. The witness vault, Serat said. Yes. A pulse rolled through the station from outer shield to inner spine. Defensive sectors appeared on internal displays. 3 had gone amber. 1 had gone dark entirely. The thing beyond Orith Prime was no longer merely observing. It was pressing. Serat turned to her guards. Seal summit weapons access. Freeze all automated purge authorities. Nothing fires on delegation tags without my direct biometric. Mercer cut in immediately. Too slow. Her gaze hit him like a knife. Careful. They already forged 1 purge order through your own architecture, he said. If you centralize lethal authority now, they only need 1 more inserted command and you hand them the station. Teren hated how quickly he knew the human was right. The sanctuary's systems were no longer neutral tools. Anything centralized could be turned. Then say something useful, Serat snapped. Mercer did. Decentralize. Human method. Break command into witnessed local cells. Analog confirmations. Physical countersigns. Strip every lethal decision back to face, voice, and line of sight until the vault tells you what remains real. For the first time that night, Serat looked less offended by human divergence than grimly willing to borrow it. Orders began moving through runners, hardline nodes, local loops, and spoken directives witnessed by 2 officers at a time. Elegant coalition procedure gave way to something older, rougher, and far harder to corrupt. It should have felt like regression. Instead it felt like the station finally remembering how to survive. They moved toward the descent spine together. Teren, Serat, Mercer, and eventually Alara Thorne herself at the lower transfer bay, standing beside sealed cases and 2 members of her delegation. She no longer looked like the serene diplomat under the crystal dome. She looked leaner. Harder. More dangerous. Serat's hand hovered near her sidearm. You are moving toward a restricted continuity site. Yes, Alara said. Because the moment the false purge order triggered buried protocols, the witness vault became primary terrain. You knew about it? Teren asked. Not specifically, she said. But we suspected Orith Prime anchored a hidden continuity structure long before the summit began. How? Because Earth spent 9 years tracking historical discontinuities across border systems your coalition classified as administrative error. Places where memory, law, and sequence were bent just enough that populations blamed themselves for changes imposed from elsewhere. Orith Prime kept appearing at the edge of those distortions like a landmark no one wanted to look at directly. Humanity had not come to the coalition only hopeful and curious. They had come carrying a hypothesis. The summit had never been just accession. It had been contact and test at once. You used your own admission as bait, Serat said coldly. Ilara met the accusation head-on. We used our visibility as pressure. There is a difference. 3 decks of my station are collapsing because of it. No, Ilara said, and real heat entered her voice for the first time. 3 decks are collapsing because something old and practiced in the manipulation of truth decided your institutions would rather turn inward than ask why. No one had time to argue further. The outer mass made its next move. Every light in the bay whitened to painful brilliance. The floor thrummed. Then a sound rolled through Orith Prime unlike any alarm Teren had ever heard, not warning, not impact, but harmonic pressure, as if the station itself had become a struck instrument. Surface telemetry flooded the chamber. Black vectors were descending through the dead world's silver storms. Not ships exactly. Insertion spears. Aimed directly at the geometric convergence below. They're going for the vault, Mercer said. Launch, Serat answered. The descent was violent. The freight cradle tore down magnetic rails while Orith Prime shuddered overhead and the dead world opened beneath them like a forced secret. Through the reinforced slit, Teren saw a basalt plain cut by luminous fault lines, ruined towers half buried in ash, and at the center of a cratered basin a vast circular structure emerging from centuries of black dust. The witness vault was not a bunker. It was a city kernel. A place built to remember for those above who might one day forget. The cradle slammed into surface lock. Diplomacy ended there. Serat's guards secured the perimeter. Mercer and Ilara split immediately, one toward the vault interface, one toward physical archive pylons rising from the ash. Teren helped drag sealed cases through a storm-whipped trench while the sky above filled with descending black spears. The enemy reached the surface before the vault fully opened. They were not monstrous in the obvious way. No claws. No theatrical armor. No screaming brutality. Their terror lay in design. Pale field suits. Faceless helms. Movements so synchronized they looked pre-decided. They advanced not like soldiers entering battle, but like administrators arriving to correct an error. Even on sight, their doctrine remained the same. Destabilize sequence. Punish whatever still insists on being real. The first exchange of force was brief and ugly. Serat's guards fired only on visual confirmation. The enemy answered by striking hardline relays, seal nodes, and local authentication points before they targeted bodies. They wanted to blind the vault before they took it. Human preparation met them there. Mercer's sealed cases contained no elegant superweapons. They held analog continuity kits, printed route maps, physical relays, blind. Mechanical triggers, translation keys, hard-coded failovers. Earth had come prepared to fight a war against corrupted sequence. Inside the vault, the deeper truth finally surfaced. Ilara activated the witness chamber through a 3-part authentication chain, coalition founding glyphs, sanctuary continuity protocol, and a human override derived from the anomaly patterns Earth had spent years tracking. The system answered all 3. A sphere of light rose from the chamber floor and unfolded into layered records older than the coalition's public history. Not just treaties and founding speeches. Fracture maps. Suppression events. Archive excisions. Continuity wars buried beneath sanitized eras of peace. The coalition had not been born through calm, gradual enlightenment. It had been assembled after surviving an adversary that weaponized chronology, trust, and administrative reality itself. The founders had built Orith Prime as sanctuary and alarm bell, then buried the truth when memory of the threat became politically inconvenient. Humanity had not awakened that enemy by arriving. Humanity had arrived in time to catch it waking again. That realization hit Teren harder than the gunfire outside. For all their crystal domes and ceremonial language, the coalition had been living atop a sealed wound while calling it stable history. Earth, the newest voice in the room, had not brought contamination. It had brought enough unfamiliar perspective to make the concealment fail. Then the witness chamber began to broadcast. That had been the founders' final design. If continuity attack returned, truth would not remain local. It would propagate outward through channels too old and too redundant to suppress cleanly. Across Orith Prime. across linked council systems, across border archives and dormant repositories. Buried history began to surface. The enemy understood the loss instantly. Its surface assault changed character. No longer surgical. Desperate. One of the black insertion spears slammed into the basin rim and unfolded into a towering interference array aimed directly at the witness chamber. Mercer saw it first. "If that sinks," he shouted, "the broadcast folds back into uncertainty." There was no grand plan after that. Only decisions. Ilara moved first toward the trench, not with theatrical heroism, but with the cold certainty of someone who had been pricing risk for years. Serat sent 2 guards with her. Teren followed because analysis had finally reached the point where it either became action or meant nothing at all. They reached the interference array through ash, stormlight, and shattered stone. Up close it hummed with the same logic as the forged purge order, designed not to destroy truth, but to make every real signal arrive doubtful and every false one arrive clean. Humanity's answer was brutally simple. Mercer had brought a local sequence breaker, a hardwired charge built not to outthink chronology warfare, but to ruin the precision it depended on. "You made explosives for sequence corruption," Teren shouted over the storm. Mercer's answer came flat and immediate. "We make tools for whatever keeps pretending it isn't war." Ilara armed it manually because the array was already corrupting remote triggers. Enemy units closed fast. Serat's guards bought seconds. Teren reached Ilara just as the spindle locked. In the basin glow and stormlight, she looked less like an ambassador than the truth her earlier speech had concealed so well, a woman who believed peace mattered enough to prepare for those who fed on its assumptions. "Get clear," she said. They did not get far. The blast was not large by battlefield standards. It was exact. The interference array folded inward on its own timing field and vanished in a burst of white static and black ash. Across the basin, the witness chamber stabilized. Above them, Orith Prime's corrupted internal sequence snapped back toward alignment layer by layer as buried truth outran forged instruction. The surviving enemy units withdrew almost immediately. Not routed. Recalculating. That was the final chill. This was not a foe built on rage. It was built on patience, revision, and return. By the time full contact was restored with the sanctuary, the summit was no longer what it had been that morning. Delegates who had nearly acted on a false purge order were now staring at founding records their institutions had hidden for generations. The coalition had not merely survived an attack. It had been forced to remember what kind of war it had once been built to outlast. And humanity's place inside that memory had changed. Not saviors. Not innocents. Not secret conquerors. The lights did not fail. Gravity did not buckle. Nothing so dramatic. Instead, every wall display in the gallery, every slate in every guard's hand, every suspended information ribbon across the sanctuary bloomed at once with a message that no system acknowledged sending. Coalition notice, human accession review revoked. Biocognitive contamination risk confirmed. Internal security purge authorized. The words vanished after 2 seconds. 2 was enough. One of Serat's guards turned instinctively toward Mercer. Another toward Teren. Somewhere deeper in the station alarms began, stopped, then resumed on the wrong interval. Doors sealed in one corridor and opened in another. Across the summit decks, delegates who had trusted the process 1 moment earlier now had proof, or what looked like proof, that the process itself had condemned the newest species in the room. Teren could almost feel the panic racing ahead of explanation, finding old prejudice, fear, and ambition, joining them into something self-justifying before facts could catch up. Mercer moved first, but not toward escape. He snatched the nearest guard slate, overrode the local display band with terrifying speed, and projected the transmission metadata into the air. It didn't originate from Sanctuary Command, he snapped. Look at the delay fold. It was inserted between internal authentication layers. Serat's eyes flicked across the data and hardened. Someone wants us to believe we already chose violence. Yes, Mercer said. Because once you act on a forged sequence, the forgery becomes history. The line hit Teren harder than anything else that night because it explained the larger terror so elegantly. This enemy did not simply lie. It manufactured irreversible context. If institutions reacted before verifying, they became the instrument of their own corruption. The next revelation came from a source no one in the room expected. One of Serad's junior guards, a quiet analyst-tagged officer named Ilian, stepped forward pale-faced and holding a private comm slab with both hands. "Minister," he said, voice shaking despite obvious effort, "the Deep Vault just opened a restricted ancestry layer in response to the false purge order. It only unlocks during continuity attacks." Serat turned on him. "Why was that protocol not in my briefing?" "Because the vault was sealed before your tenure. Founding-era contingency." She took the slab, scanned it once, and for the first time since entering the gallery seemed genuinely blindsided. Teren saw the color leave her face by degrees. "What is it?" he asked. Serat looked up slowly, gaze moving from Teren to Mercer to the dark beyond the glass where the unseen watcher still lingered. When she spoke, each word felt cut from something heavier than fear. "Orith Prime was not built only as a sanctuary," she said. "It was built as a witness site." No one answered. She continued. "The founders anticipated an external power capable of tampering with records, sequence logic, and interpolity trust. This station was placed here because the dead world below contains physical archives too primitive to rewrite remotely and too redundant to erase cleanly. If continuity was ever attacked, the sanctuary was meant to verify the truth against buried original history." Teren stared at her. "You're saying the coalition knew this was possible?" "No," Serat said, voice tightening. "I am saying someone in the coalition's beginning feared it enough to build against it, and then allowed the knowledge to be buried." Mercer's expression had gone still in a way Teren was beginning to understand as his most serious state. "Then this is larger than accession interference," he said softly. "They didn't come because humanity arrived." The implications snapped into place one after another with sickening precision. The mass outside the station. The timing during Earth's welcome. The attack on chronology. The forged purge order. The sealed founding contingency. Humanity was not the cause. Humanity had been the trigger. Earth's arrival had forced a structure buried at the coalition's origin to wake up, and something ancient enough to recognize that wakefulness had moved instantly to smother it. Teren felt the whole summit change shape in his mind. This was no longer a diplomatic crisis orbiting a suspicious newcomer. It was a collision between present ceremony and hidden history, and the unknown force outside had acted with the confidence of something that understood both better than anyone inside the sanctuary did. Then the dead world below them answered. The silver storm veins across its surface brightened at once, converging across the dark hemisphere into geometric lines no natural weather system could have formed. Ancient patterns awakened under the cloud layer like circuitry beneath skin. The observatory glass, still carrying the shadow of the unseen mass beyond, filled now with the reflected glow of something buried and immense turning on beneath the planet's crust. And in that reflected light, Teren saw Jonah Mercer stop looking like a diplomat entirely. He looked like a man who had just recognized an old enemy. The sanctuary did not descend into panic after the eclipse. That was the first sign of how dangerous the moment truly was. Panic was visible. Panic could be contained, redirected, sedated with authority and ritual. What spread through Orith Prime in the minutes that followed was worse: disciplined confusion. Corridor traffic slowed. Security teams moved without sirens. Public terminals refreshed and refreshed again. Delegates kept speaking in measured tones while every private channel in the station began to burn. Teren watched the first stage of institutional denial unfold almost beautifully. The observatory blackout was classified as a transient alignment error. The upper council requested sensor verification before issuing any notice. The sanctuary's command staff sealed 3 decks and quietly recalled all exterior maintenance crews. No one wanted to be the first official voice to admit that something large enough to cast an unscheduled shadow across a coalition sanctuary had crossed detection limits without permission. Admission would mean vulnerability. Vulnerability at a summit meant leverage, and leverage attracted every predator within range. Mercer understood that as clearly as Teren did. He was already moving before the sanctuary finished inventing its first harmless explanation. "Your hosts are about to lose an hour to procedure," he said, pacing beside the darkened gallery glass. Whoever is out there knows that. We don't have an hour. We don't have trust either, Teren replied. Not enough for me to treat vague human warnings as operational fact. Mercer gave him a sharp, humorless glance. Good. Blind trust would make you useless. But if you insist on waiting until every committee agrees a knife is a knife, you are going to spend the next phase of your life explaining why your station was caught studying the blade while it was already in the room. That should have offended him. Instead it struck the exact nerve Mercer intended. Teren did not like being maneuvered, and he disliked even more the growing suspicion that the human had measured that reaction in advance. He sent the alert then, but not through the main summit channel. He routed it to Serat, the senior coalition security minister whose distrust of emerging powers was matched only by her contempt for incompetence. Teren did not accuse humanity. He did not mention Mercer by name. He sent timestamps, the maintenance reading, the observatory eclipse, and a single line of recommendation: external sensor isolation now, accession protocols suspended quietly, human delegation contained but not challenged until intent is established. Her reply came 12 seconds later. Acknowledged. Report in person. Bring everything. He almost went. Then the first real breach happened. It began in the sanctuary's memory spine, not its weapons grid. 3 public historical archives glitched simultaneously. Harmless on the surface. A treaty sequence lost a signatory species for 0.8 seconds. A border conflict summary replaced casualty totals with blank fields. A well-known Foundation charter loaded with its original date missing, then corrected itself before most readers could register the absence. Any single fault would have been routine corruption. Taken together, they formed a pattern too pointed to ignore. Something inside Orith Prime was probing not its armor, but its trust structure. Mercer had seen similar things before. Teren knew it from the way the human's face changed. What is that? Teren demanded. Testing, Mercer said. Or rehearsal. Witnesses who had arrived young enough to be underestimated and prepared enough to matter. Much later, when Teren stood again beneath the crystal dome, the light felt different. Repair crews moved below. Delegations spoke in quieter, sharper circles. No final vote was taken that day. Too much had changed for ceremonial closure. Jonah Mercer joined him at the rail, jacket torn, expression tired, eyes still infuriatingly alert. After a long silence, Teren said, "You were right." Mercer glanced sideways. About which part? That the danger was already in the room before anyone agreed what to call it. Mercer looked down at the recovering station, then outward through restored glass toward the dark where the hidden mass had vanished. That's the trouble with certain enemies, he said. They do their best work by convincing civilizations that truth can wait until after comfort. Below them, official history was being rewritten back toward honesty. Above them, the stars remained silent. But it was no longer the silence of ignorance. It was the silence that follows recognition.